Thank you all
How are
so
you?
much for joining us. We're so happy you're here. I'm sure more people are going to keep joining, but I'll just get my little intro out of the way so I can turn it over to Allison and Kevin. Let's see. Yes. So I'm Sarah Chapman, and I'm the executive director of the nonprofit Media Burn Archive, which is based in Chicago. Media Burn collects, produces, and distributes documentary video created by artists, activists, and community groups. Our mission is to use archival media to deepen context and encourage critical thought through social justice lens. And this event is the sort of first instance in our second year of virtual talks with video activists, which we started last year, and create conversations surrounding independent media production. So we'd really like for the event to be as interactive as you want it to be and to really give you a chance to talk to our guests. So we're very excited tonight to be presenting a discussion with filmmaker Kevin B. Lee. And Allison DeFren will be our moderator. She is a media maker / scholar and the chair and associate professor of the Media Arts and Culture Department at Occidental College in Los Angeles. Her documentaries and video essays have been screened internationally and published in a variety of online journals. She has recently published the article From the Essay Film to the Video Essay, Between the Critical and the Popular, in which she discusses Kevin's work. And we will put links in the chat for you to read the essay if you didn't read it already. We posted a link in the event description, as well as a link to buy the anthology book. So with that, I am going to, just be quiet and turn it over to Allison.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm really honored to be here and to moderate this session on the work of Kevin B. Lee. And I just want to say before we begin that the essay that's up on Eventbrite, it's like not even just hot off the presses. I didn't have a copy of it, so what's posted is a proof of the last proof of the essay. So you're actually going to see my edit notes. I apologize for that. And I encourage you to buy the anthology if you're interested. So the focus of our discussion today is the video essay, an audiovisual form that's been alternately linked with experimental and avant-garde film, documentary, and what's often considered an offshoot of the documentary, the essay film. We're going to be discussing in particular the kind of video essays that are proliferating online, whose focus is on film and other media. Although I sense that I am preaching to the already converted and recruited just a little bit. Online video essays range from work made by scholars or scholar practitioners who analyze film and media as an alternative to the written scholarly essay, to critics doing what critics do, which is commenting on the elements of a film or media work to draw out the good, the bad, and the ugly, and to fans creating supercuts and video send-ups of their favorite films and television shows. All of this is to say that there's a broad range of video essays online and a growing number of practitioners who have different reasons for participating in this ever-evolving form of audiovisual commentary. And there's really no better way to think about the video essay, what it is, how it's evolved, and what its critical and creative possibilities and potentialities are than through the work of Kevin B. Lee. Kevin, as many of you know, has made more than 360 video essays, inspiring the New York Times to dub him the king of the video essay. He's spoken about, written about, and made video essays about the way that the video essay is evolving online, presenting at every kind of film-centric venue you can imagine, including festivals, museums, galleries, and colleges. And he's promoted and mentored the work of countless other practitioners, myself included. What I've always loved about Kevin as a video essayist, which I think you're going to see today, is that he's as much a champion of the form as he is a critic. And he keeps pushing himself in relation to the form, innovating new audiovisual techniques and attempting a deeper criticality. In our Q&A discussion today, we're going to follow the arc of Kevin's career and his superhero transformation from cinephile film critic posting video essays on YouTube to media artist activist. As we proceed, I invite you to think about your own encounters with and opinions about the video essay and to note any questions you might want to ask. You can ask them in the chat Actually, again, Sarah, what are the best ways for people to ask questions? You can ask at any point throughout the presentation, and we'll probably field them at the end of the presentation, unless they seem particularly salient. In which case, we'll do it in media res, which I know you all know what that means. Okay.
Yeah, and we encourage you at the end, if you want to ask your question out loud, to just raise your hand and Allison will call on you. Yeah, but chat or out loud, but wait until the end for out loud.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm sure this isn't the beginning, but let's begin. Let's begin at kind of the beginning of Kevin's video essay career. So Kevin, you began posting video essays to YouTube not long after the site was launched in 2005. So first, I'm curious about what originally motivated you to begin making video essays, what your understanding was of the form at the time. Had you seen other video essays? And whether you had or not, were there any particular media practitioners or filmmakers who influenced your work?
Yes, thanks, Allison, and thank you everyone for joining. I really like this kind of cozy atmosphere. It's about as cozy as Zoom can get, just to see your names and in some cases your faces. And as Allison mentioned, please, we'd love to hear any comments and questions at any time through the chat. Because there aren't so many of us, I think it's rather manageable, and I'd like to make it as interactive and as conversational as possible with you. Really appreciate your time, given that it's the midst of summer. I'm actually on vacation right now. This is my mom's house where I grew up, so you can see my mother's patented shoebox filing system behind me. So if we want to talk about origins, yeah, like I started off really kind of an aspiring filmmaker, and given that part of the topic of today is activism, video activism, some of my first documentaries were works of video activism, documenting the effect of 9/11 on the Chinatown community in New York City, a documentary about Sikh Americans and what they had experienced right after 9/11 in terms of hate crimes and discrimination. So very much activist filmmaking, yeah, with an Asian American emphasis. I was building towards wanting to make feature films, and at some point it just sort of got blocked, just to kind of make that leap from making short films to longer form works. And so then I started asking myself, okay, what do I need to do to make a feature film? I started studying films a lot. I started a blog to write about the films I was studying. And then around 2006, 2007, I realized that, wow, this new website called YouTube, you can upload your own clips on it. So I could like upload a short clip from the film that I'm writing about on my blog and, embed that on my blog. That's neat. Then I started to realize, well, there's actually a way I could actually add my own commentary directly on the video just through editing. So it was just sort of a very swift, organic process. And before you know it, I was starting to make full-blown mini documentaries at the time. That was one way of calling it. But then video essays sort of emerged as a term that really kind of stuck to describe what this was exactly. I was kind of taking my cues from DVD bonus features, when you'd have like either a commentary track or a short documentary or video essay on a DVD. But I think the primary reference point for me, one of the biggest inspirations would be the film Los Angeles Plays Itself by Tom Anderson. It's really a spectacular example of using media to reflect critically upon itself and to really allow us to see a deeper world, a richer world, and a more socially conscious world through media that would otherwise be written off as just like, superficial entertainment or, just movies, right? So I would consider this to be a major example of video essay practice, or videographic, as the academics like to call it, videographic criticism applied with an activist sensibility. Los Angeles Plays Itself is really a great example of this.
So this arc that I've described before between cinephile and activist, it sounds like it may be a misstatement that you had activist tendencies from the very beginning. And I think of Los Angeles Plays Itself. I know he hates it when you say LA plays itself. So in his honor, Los Angeles Plays itself. It is an incredibly critical piece. So this wasn't an entire transformation. But did you think of yourself as a cinephile?
I definitely saw myself as a cinephile, but less as an activist. That's actually a term that I don't wear comfortably even now. And even when I was making those documentaries early on, I don't know. It was more kind of answering the call to something, but something about sort of claiming that term activist and labeling yourself that. I don't know if it just strikes me as pretentious in a way. I don't know. It just comes with certain associations of kind of like a high-minded do-gooder. I don't know if that's just something that that also like speaks to like my family upbringing, because my family is not political at all. Nor were they very supportive of my cinematic pursuits. They just thought like being involved in the entertainment industry is a one-way ticket to poverty. So it's interesting that both these terms, cinephile or filmmaker or activist, are all terms that I've had very fraught and ambivalent relationships with, that may stem from growing up as an Asian American. But yeah, nonetheless, I persist, and it's interesting to think about how these two modes of being a passionate cinephile or someone who really has a desire to practice cinema, and same time an activist sensibility, how these two can inform each other, especially when one doesn't feel sort of naturally entitled to perform these roles. And I think this is a key insight when it comes to understanding how it ended up with me uploading things on YouTube, because it's like, okay, I don't really feel comfortable in the established forums and arenas for practicing activism or film, but this kind of well, at the time I would call it a liminal space of YouTube. It was like an anything goes space. It was like a Wild West. It's nothing like what it is now, where it's become thoroughly over commercialized and very much like attuned to the algorithms of the attention economy. But back in 2007, it was just like, yeah, you want to do whatever, you know. So I was really embracing that freedom to just kind of explore my interests and sort of work some things out for myself with regards to my relationship to cinema and to the world. So I really do appreciate that window of time that I had.
Yeah, so just when you thought you had access in 2009, YouTube shuts down your site for copyright infringement. So I'm curious whether it was something that you were concerned about prior, what your understanding was of YouTube's policies regarding copyrighted material, and also how it ended up impacting your work.
Yeah, it's really a great kind of next chapter of the story, isn't it? Because I had this experience of seemingly total freedom to upload things and to create things, and I had made about 50 video essays at the time, and one of the key things that I really appreciate from that time was I used it as a period also to collaborate, because I was working in a fairly novel form of this like online YouTube video essay film criticism. It was something that almost immediately caught the eye of more established critics like Richard Brody of The New Yorker, or Matt Zoller Seitz of New York Magazine and Vulture, Roger Ebert. And yeah, I started to form friendships and correspondences with them that then led to collaborations. So, Richard Brody's first video essay was made with me, was on Straub Huillet's Not Reconciled. And then he went on to hire someone in the New Yorker to produce these weekly video essays on the New Yorker website. Matt Zoller Seitz, we made a few video essays together, and then he did this series on Wes Anderson that then led to this best-selling book about Wes Anderson. If you may know it, it's a beautiful like coffee table book. And so it just sort of goes to show how it kind of took on a life of its own. Meanwhile, I was just still plugging away on YouTube until one day in January 2009, when suddenly my account was taken away from me. And it was because they had been receiving mounting pressure from the copyright holders, the media companies, the movie studios. Why are all of our films or clips of our films showing up on YouTube, you have no right to be profiting from this copyrighted material. So then YouTube very quickly had to come up with some sort of mediation regulation policy. So they came up with a 3 strikes policy that they then applied retroactively to any, existing material. And I'd already produced dozens of video essays using copyrighted materials. So just like that, the plug was pulled on my account. But because I had made these bonds with film critics like Roger Ebert and Matt Zoller Seitz, Matt especially wrote this really scathing rebuke of YouTube that then got circulated. And then within a few days, YouTube reinstated my account. So I was very grateful for that. I was grateful for, and again, I wasn't really thinking this in terms of activism at all. I mean, I have to admit, I was rather naive to what was going on. But, in hindsight, it really was an eye-opening experience of media rights, media speech, and what are the kind of economic forces that are governing how we use audiovisual materials as acts of speech, as acts of communication, because that's really what it came down to, isn't it? Like it really was like speaking online. And now and looking at what it was like in 2009 compared to what it is today, you really see the ways in which audiovisual speech is regulated on YouTube because of these guidelines that have been so internalized that they aren't even questioned anymore. It's just sort of taken as the rules of the game, and they really do create strictures for how one produces audiovisual material on YouTube and what they talk about and how. So yeah, but it really opened my eyes up to these economic and industrial forces that then have political implications on media practice. And I think that started to bear out in some of the work I was doing in the years to come.
So first, really interesting comment, Olivia, which I want to direct other people to as well. Next year, 2010, you're hired by the independent film streaming site Fandor, where for quite a while, and correct me if I'm wrong, I remember you telling this story, you were required to make a video essay a week. So this is like your commercial period. So were there any stipulations about the kind of video essays you were supposed to make and what they were supposed to accomplish for the site? This is a really unusual moment where companies like Fandor and Criterion are hiring people like you and Kogonada to make, these little breadcrumbs to lead back to their site.
Right. There is a bit of a nuance to this story. I mean, it has multiple phases. So the one video essay a week thing came a bit later. So I want to kind of do a lead up to that, because you're right. It was actually after this brouhaha with YouTube that then established media companies like Focus Features or IFC, and then Fandor. They then reached out to me saying, hey, we saw what YouTube did to your account. We find what you're doing very interesting. We want to make an honest citizen out of you. Or I forget exactly what they said. Like, let's have you work with our films, the films that we have the rights to, that we are actually trying to distribute and circulate through our channels. And we can have you make video essays celebrating our films. And I thought, okay, great. I can actually, do this and be protected and also make income doing this. But then, yeah, it also opened my eyes to the fact that this practice of audiovisual criticism can also serve a promotional role. But maybe this has always been the case, where the work of the critic can be easily and quickly co-opted into the work of the promoter or the publicist, right? But this was what I was experiencing just through a new form of media production through the video essay. But given that I didn't have many other options for making gainful employment doing this sort of work, I took it, especially with Fandor. Fandor hired me as their chief video essayist. I love how they come up with these, new titles. It's very much a Silicon Valley way of coming up with job titles. And at first they were very open and free. Like they were like, hey, you know, you're good at what you do. Just do what you do, and let's see what happens. Fandor, for those of you who don't know, it's right now it's kind of in a limbo state. It was launched in 2010 as a rival to Mubi, which I think many of you know, and you know, a website, a streaming platform for independent international cinema, the type of stuff that Netflix won't touch, or you know, just doesn't bother with. So festival films, independent films. My job was to make video essays to celebrate these works, films by the likes of Apichan Versethakul or Claire Denis or Abbas Kiarostami, you know, films that I'm very passionate about, but it turns out that not that many people in the world actually know about compared to, say, you know, Quentin Tarantino or Steven Spielberg. And very quickly it became apparent that it was sort of like a vicious cycle where, you know, if you're making videos about films that not many people know about, not many people are going to watch those films, compared to the video essays by the, you know, those A-list Hollywood filmmakers. And I became conscious of the fact that I might be losing my job soon if I wasn't able to bring in the potential subscribers through my video content. So I had to ask myself, what is the most viral video I could produce? And it was at that time that Steven Spielberg had 2 new films coming out. So I thought, okay, I'll do something about Spielberg, but I'll try to do it in a way that's smart and thoughtful, and really exercising criticality. So I think that's what we're going to watch now, is just the first 2 minutes of this video called The Spielberg Phase.
If there is one recurring image that defines the cinema of Steven Spielberg, it is the Spielberg face. Eyes open, staring in wordless wonder in a moment where time stands still. But above all, a childlike surrender in the act of watching, both theirs and ours. It's as if their total submission to what they are seeing mirrors our own. The face tells us that a monumental event is happening. In doing so, it also tells us how we should feel. If Spielberg deserves to be called a master of audience manipulation, then this is his signature stroke. You can't think of the most iconic moments in Spielberg's cinema without the Spielberg face.
So just to finish the story, I uploaded this video in like December 2011, and then that morning, my boss asked me to have lunch with him. We went to lunch, and he told me that because of the lack of traffic coming to the site because of my videos, that my services were no longer needed. So I lost my job the same day that I uploaded this video. But then I came back from lunch, and the whole office was like a buzz for some reason. Like, and was like, what's going on at the office? My God, we've had like this swell of traffic like we've never experienced before. Like, so many people are coming to the site. What's happening? Oh, it looks like it's coming from this video that Kevin uploaded this morning. So then my boss then invited me to a coffee, and it was during this coffee he said, okay, we can see the potential that you have, but it's still not enough to justify you as a full-time employee. So we'll retain you on a freelance basis, and you can make as many videos as you want that will pay you X amount of dollars to do that. And so then I was no longer freelance. I was no longer full-time. And because of this freelance arrangement, I had to make a video a week just in order to basically pay the bills. So it was just really the economic structure of it. So it was really kind of a necessity that led to that, Allison. But on the other hand, because I had to do that every week, it actually provided a structure and a discipline for me to just kind of think very quickly. Okay, what's the thing I want to explore this week? How do I make it interesting for myself? And just by having that frequency of repetition, I was able to explore a whole variety of topics and employ a whole variety of techniques. So in some ways, it was a blessing in disguise, although it was also incredibly exhausting. And after a few years of this, by around 2014, it was just simply no longer sustainable.
I'm curious, were any kind of ViewClick quotas put on your work at Fandor?
If they weren't. I wasn't informed of them. So, I mean, it was there's a weird duality with Silicon Valley where, it's like all Wild West and you can do anything you want until some point where it's like, okay, now we have to impose some very, very strict metrics on you. And in some cases, it's very simultaneous. Like if you look at Amazon, like the executives can do whatever the hell they want. Meanwhile, the people working in the fulfillment centers, they're basically being measured down to the second of what they do. So that duality between like total freedom and total bondage, it's such a Silicon Valley type thing. And I guess I sort of go back and forth with that myself. Some of the video essays I've made have actually incorporated metrical, quantitative statistics. I did this one thing that actually got covered by the New York Times where I was measuring the screen times of Oscar-nominated actors and actresses. And I found that the Oscar-nominated actors had twice as much screen time as Oscar-nominated actresses, which then led to a whole debate about just screen time in general for, divided between gender. So I find that these kind of metrical and quantitative tools can be illuminating and they can be useful, but they should only be like one part of a larger repertoire, and they should be used poetically. Or, I mean, that actually was another example of activism, wasn't it? They can be used in ways that are very powerful and very, very eye-opening. So yeah, that was a good example.
Yeah, for me, the Spielberg Phase really embodies the sort of schizophrenia of your position and an ongoing tension that it feels like you kind of sense and maybe from the beginning have grappled with in your work between the kind of popular appeal that online distribution and Fandor in particular demand, and the video essay as a mode of critical expression. So the Spielberg Phase, it's kind of like a supercut. It sort of is a supercut. It's probably why it went viral, and it probably would have gotten even more numbers, like if you had kept your mouth shut, right? But instead, and I don't know what Fandor thought about this, it's a critique of Steven Spielberg's heavy-handed tactics for emotional signaling, the way he manipulates us. So this kind of leads off into my next question, which is, while you're working at Fandor, you're also starting to preach the gospel of the video essay at film festivals and within increasingly academic contexts. And you're also experimenting and innovating new forms of video essay making, like the desktop documentary. So I'm curious how these two activities, so video editor for a commercial site where there are increasingly tighter constraints on your work, and then theorist practitioner dedicated to the form's artistic and critical potential. How do these two roles inform each other, play off of one another, make you crazy, or
yeah, all of the above, Allison. And I'm glad you brought up that point about, because that's actually exactly what my brother said. My brother works in Silicon Valley, just so you know. And he said, this Spielberg Phase video that you did, it probably would have gotten more views if you hadn't said anything. then people could just sort of revel in the pure kind of montage pleasure factor of just seeing one face after another. But yeah, Allison, as you said, like I had to add that layer of critical commentary as a way of pushing against the effect. I see Corey has this commentary or this observation about the discovery of Furoki. Yeah, I think Furoki was in many ways a great example of this. Someone who presents images, oftentimes images that are meant to exert power or pleasure over the audience, but work with them in such a way that establishes a position of critical resistance, which in his case has often been tied to an activist agenda. So so he was definitely someone that pointed a direction to get away from this. The commercial mode, I think it in many ways it kept me honest in that it was like, okay, how do I engage my own interests with a larger audience, and how much can I actually bring an audience along in my sort of critical interests? But then after a few years, this just got to be a bit untenable, especially within the very concentrated and ephemeral kind of superficial attention economy. It's just like you just can't get that deep, So I was looking for some exits, and then that's what led me to start my studies at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which I was doing while I was still doing the weekly video essays. It was like my work study program. And through that, I somehow managed to make this desktop documentary, which we don't have time to get into today. I mean, that's a whole thing in itself. But that was very much a product of being at the Art Institute and just being in a super creative environment that was just like liberated from commercial demands or pressures. And that was just like such a rejuvenating period for me. But the fact that I did something about Transformers was maybe a carryover of being in that like hyper commercialized environment and just really trying to find a way to respond to that. I just wanted to acknowledge that film because Sarah, I think that's how you learned about my work. And to some extent, I would also call this an example of media activism, certainly creating a strong critical position within global blockbuster entertainment culture, and just seeing what it's doing to us in our real world and our virtual world, and what positions we can take in resistance to it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that film, although we just don't have time to watch it today.
So I want to follow up, since this is also relevant to Corey's question about Haroon Farouki. During that time, like the Fandor time, right before you go back to school, I think. What year did you go back to school?
2013.
Oh, no. Okay. So it's when you go back to school. You make a number of video essays about the evolution of the online video essay. And here again, you seem to be working through the tension between, cinephilia, popularity, and criticality. So there's what makes a video essay great, and in which you're kind of lamenting the increasing appearance of work with fast-paced editing and hyper narration. And the video essay we're going to screen next, which is entitled The Essay Film, Some Thoughts of Discontent, which was made in 2014, is one of the two that I wrote about in my essay. And it seems to me like you're placing the online video essay directly in the lineage of the essay film, and asking what cultural work the essay film performed in its day and how one might achieve similar aims within the current online digital environment. I know you've said that was inspired by Farouki. We can watch it and then talk about it, or you might, I don't know if you want to say anything about it up front before we watch it.
Sorry, I'm muted. Sorry. I just said it's an excellent opportunity for all of us, the audience, to think about the difference between an essay film and a video essay. And so this was very much the prompt that I was trying to explore. What is it about the essay film that I could kind of take inspiration to infuse into this new form of the online video essay.
In the 21st century, culture is a factory of spectacle, incessantly serving fodder for our mass consumption. Werner Herzog once said that we are starving for new images, but that was 40 years ago. We have more images and more knowledge now than we know what to do with. To be in the world today is to be engulfed in sensory data, drowning us in its incessant stream. And what are essay films? Some say that it's a subgenre of documentary films, or possibly even a genre to itself.
Imagine a cinema that lets us see in two directions at once. The screen is a window that faces out into the world, exploring any number of subjects. What makes these films different from documentaries is that they aren't just about these topics. They look out at the world, but they also look inward, exploring how we think about what we see.
Ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction, this is a film about trickery and fraud, about lies.
Movies bury their traces, choosing for us what to watch. But what if we watch with our voluntary attention, instead of letting the movies direct us?
Tickets from the automatic dispenser grant admission to the show.
Many people think an essay film relies on a narration, like the kind you would find in a written essay, or in the video you are watching now.
مرا باده سرگردانی نوشانده‌ای چه مهیب است کارهای تو چه مهیب است کارهای تو
because it does not take sounds and images for granted, so that behind the screen, one feels the mind at work, letting us see and hear how it thinks.
Kann ja jeder sagen. Das sind die Hände auf dem Tisch, nehmen Sie die Waffe an die Seite. Hierher? Wo soll ich die Waffe hinpacken? Die Hände vom Tisch. Das Spielzeug. Die Hände vom Tisch. Na, erst heute ist der Ofentisch und jetzt vom Tisch. Ihr wisst doch nicht, was ihr wollt. Stehen Sie mal auf. Gehen Sie mal da hinten hin. An der Wand. Ja, doch keine Hektik hier. Da ist eine Macht, Mann.
Yeah, and you know, Allison, you wrote about, I think you wrote about this video within the larger question that, you know, we posed to the audience, which is how does a video essay relate to the essay film? What can it take from it? And I don't know if you want to say a little bit about what you wrote.
Well, I will say one of the things that I really admire about what you do with this video essay. First, it's just, you know, quoting all of these iconic essay films, and I'm curious how it shifted your understanding of the essay film, and whether many of them were new to you or not, but also that this idea that you're ultimately locating what an essay film is in discontentment, which really runs counter to what we see online. You know, what we see online are like an explosion of celebratory supercuts and a revival of auteurism, you know, people just digging on films and directors, and it's why this video essay really appeals to me, and what you do in general really appeals to me, which is there's this sense that the ultimate purpose is to go somewhere that is beyond the frame, that is beyond the object itself, towards some and it might be, you know, into some other ideological terrain or political terrain. And I would say, you know, that's what I feel about the essay film. I mean, there are like some technical things that people say about the essay film that, oh, what distinguishes it from documentary is that, you know, it's less interested in realism and the facts. There's greater optical experimentation. Words are often used like kaleidoscopic, or refractive. Actually, you know, I one thing I want to pull from my essay, because I think he's trying to get at this, and I think this video essay is a great example of it, is Timothy Corrigan, who has an entire book on the essay film, talks about a kind of film that critiques other forms of film and media. He calls it refractive cinema, which is different than reflexive cinema, reflexivity, which we often associate with the essay film. So it's work it's not just interested in its own making or commenting on its own making, but it's using that reflexivity, again, to get beyond the frame, to think about cinematic thinking, and beyond cinematic thinking, where in fact it can take us. So just a quote from him: "These films, that is refractive films, ask us not to think so much about the aesthetics of film, the genius behind it, artistic strategies, or its emotional and imaginative communications." That's like the vast majority of video essays online, right, are doing that. Rather, refractive cinema tends in a variety of ways to draw attention to where film fails, or more precisely, where and how the cinematic can force us beyond its borders and our borders, can force us to think about a world and ourselves that necessarily and crucially exist outside the limits of cinema. I'm curious if you relate to that, but also about this question of revisiting all of these older essay films and thinking, what is it that they have to tell these the people who are creating video essays in this new digital environment where media spectacle prevails.
I mean, so many thoughts, because I was listening to you at the same time. I saw Michael Renov's comment. Shout out to Theodore Adorno. The essay's innermost formal law is heresy. This element of pushing back, of resistance, of dissent or discontent, I think is connected here. And at the same time, my thoughts are going back to the YouTube space, because maybe one of the underlying assumptions that one might take from what we're saying is like, well, maybe, the YouTube is just not the place for the sort of essayistic mode. And I will say that, it's not terribly conducive to it, because it is so much about rewarding the viewer with sort of what they already know or what they already assume or what they want. The possibility of challenging the viewer within the online space or YouTube space seems like very much an uphill battle, and this is why you have all this phenomenon of like bubbles and echo chambers and so forth. At the same time, I don't want to take away that there are practitioners who have been very experimental and very creative in just coming up with new forms of audiovisual rhetoric. People like Lindsay Ellis or ContraPoints. I'm sure some of you in the audience can think of your own people who are like, oh, they make some pretty good YouTube video essays, despite the fact that it's also become extremely normative to like present yourself on screen and to perform. Like there are these conventions that are very much kind of in place, but at the same time, these creators play with those conventions and expectations in their own ways. So it's just a matter of kind of knowing where the lines are and what different creators are doing with those lines, and that there are these like, other like these smaller or other forms of heresy or resistance that I think are necessary just to make things revived and refreshed and interesting. So I do think that is happening in the YouTube space as much as it's happening in the experimental film world and other spaces.
I would love to do an entire session just about this question and focusing on the video essay, the essay film, their relationship. I do want to say everything I know about the essay I learned from Michael Renov, so just giving him a shout out. So do we have time to talk about bottle songs?
It's a question. That's a really good question. It's like we
Since
can either
we're not showing anything from it, though it would be great to mention.
It is, it is good to mention because it's a thing. It's a project that's in the process of happening, and with regards to the activist prompt, well, it's definitely media critical because it's for those of you who don't know, it's an ongoing project of audiovisual letters written between myself and Chloe Galibert-Lenay, a fantastic filmmaker. If you don't know her work is also on YouTube. Not YouTube. It's online. It's on her Vimeo page, but it's also circulating in festivals around the world. I mean, there's a question there about availability and circulation, and how is it these days that it's possible that you put a video on Vimeo or YouTube and it's also winning awards in festivals. Is that legal? Like, how can you? But I think that just speaks to the porousness and the the rules are just not the same anymore with regards to exclusivity and accessibility. I think especially during the pandemic, and just the lines between film festivals and streaming media just really got blurred. So that was just something to think about, because I think that also informs media form, like the form that the essay takes and where people see it. But anyway, it's a series of investigations of our own experiences watching ISIS media that we encountered online. So we're kind of regarding ourselves critically, and this is worth mentioning because this is the direction that my own work and Chloe's has taken. Like we both start off as video essayists studying films, the things on screen, but over time we have shifted that critical gaze back upon ourselves and our own act of spectatorship. And and I think this points to a larger general trajectory with regards to where video essays are going. It's less and less about analyzing and explaining how movies work, and really diagnosing ourselves, our own acts of spectatorship, and what we learn about that, our own positions in the world in relation to the screen, or at least how we can triangulate our positions between the screen world and the rest of the world that's around us, and who we are and where we are within that. So I think Bottled Songs is worth mentioning, if only to raise that, that proposition of critical spectatorship being as much of a central theme or concern of the video essay, at least for myself. And I think this is what saves it from the dead end of explainer culture. I'll just throw that out there, because I know, I'm sure, I mean, there are a lot of people who just sort of assume that when we talk about video essays, oh, it's those like those explainers, like, some like teenage nerd, like explaining why Wes Anderson's the greatest filmmaker of all time, and like, you've got like hundreds of those videos on YouTube, and okay, that's a certain form, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I'm more interested in exploring than explaining. And I think when we see video essays as modes of critical spectatorship, we are more attuned to that mode of exploring than explaining.
I think what you're saying is a really nice add-on to Timothy Corrigan's ideas about refractive cinema. In a way, what you're saying is these videos have taken on a subjective dimension. They're very processual, and they're concerned with the fractured self. And in this case, attempting to grapple with work that's difficult to consume and apprehend by Westerners. And I in reading about the work, a lot of what you talk about is how do you integrate this work that has, and again, you're dealing with popularity and criticality, this work that is meant to be popular, that is meant to recruit terrorists, that is impossible to watch as a Westerner. And how does a body contain all of this, within one sitting? And in some ways that leads into the last piece that we're going to watch, Explosive Paradox on Platoon, which I see is kind of beautifully encapsulating a lot of the tensions that you're working with all along the way. So in it, you're tracing your personal experience of this Academy Award blockbuster that you're expecting to love, like any fan. And then when you go into the theater as a young Asian American, you're faced with your own personal history as well as American politics. And you're having to integrate these very different experiences. And I think this video essay does a really great job at doing that, at speaking to each of these registers. So let's watch the video essay. And then I was hoping you could discuss the very different approach that you take in this video essay. You don't show the film you're discussing at all, and also how it ties in with your increasing interest in media activism.
This is the former location of the AMC Ceremony 6 movie theater, the movie theater that my family and I would go to back in the 1980s. It shut down sometime in the 1990s, and then the building became this liquor store. But if you look carefully, you can still see the lighting fixtures from the original movie theater. It was here that my family and I saw the movie Platoon in 1987. I had read about the film in the local newspaper, the San Francisco Examiner, which described the film as an explosive paradox of a movie. And I remember opening the dictionary to look up the word paradox and still not understanding what it meant. Made me want to see the film even more, as well as a rave review by Siskel and Ebert on their television show, where they hailed it as one of the greatest war films ever made and a true achievement in cinematic art. But I think it was when the film won the Academy Award for Best Picture that my father was convinced that he should take me and the family to watch Platoon. Then we went to the movie theater, and my father told my mother to take me over to the box office, which I believe was around here, and buy 2 tickets, one for my mother and one for me. And as my mom and I walked over there, I looked back and I saw that my father and my brother were standing by the front entrance, and my father leaned over to my brother and said, go run inside. And my brother, who was 6 years old at the time, I guess he thought it was a game, ran inside the movie theater. And then my father went to the ticket taker and said, oh, my son just ran into the movie theater. I need to go get him. I'll be right back. And so he ran in after my brother. And then my mother and I walked over with our movie tickets, and the ticket taker let us through. And we went into the movie theater, where we found my father and my brother at the entrance for Platoon. So now we're on the other side of the movie theater, and I think this is the screening room where my family and I saw Platoon, deep inside the building. So the movie started, and I remember just a lot of killing and a lot of dying. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before, because up to that point, I'd seen movies like Star Wars or cartoons like G.I. Joe, where when someone dies, it registers more like a dramatic effect, and you don't really feel like a life has been lost. But I also remember a lot of sadness and tiredness and anger in these American soldiers. I saw these men inside something that was much bigger than them, and I saw what it brought out of them. And somehow, I was there with them. But then there was this one scene where one American soldier takes the butt of his rifle and smashes the head of a Vietnamese villager. And he stands over his body and he says, "You ever seen brains like that?" And this took me out of the movie, not just because it was so violent, but it took me to the playground of my school, where a couple of boys had been going around saying, "You ever seen gook brains like that?" And calling the other kids gook brains, gook brains. And the crazy thing is, these two boys were Filipino Americans. Most of the kids at my school were Asian. And me and the other kids didn't really know what they were talking about, but it felt threatening. And then, when I saw this scene, I realized that they had seen the film. So, I actually don't think it's necessary to show much footage from the film for the purposes of this video, although there is one scene that I would like to show. So after I watched the movie, the next day at school, I went up to those two kids who were calling everyone gook brains.
and I told them I'd seen the film. We talked about this scene, and one of them said, yeah, suicide. Never seen anyone kill themselves like that. But I knew he'd gotten it wrong because after the movie was over, my family had gotten into the car, and as we drove off, my father asked me what I thought of the movie. I was shaking so much, I didn't know what to say. So then he asked again, what do you think this movie is about? And I just started crying. And I couldn't say anything except for one word, which was war. And then he said, this movie has a lot to teach you about how to survive in this world, because this world is against you. This world wants to destroy you. So you have to be smarter than the world. You always have to find a way to beat the system. Just like that black guy. So at the end of the movie, there's the big fight, and he survives because he takes out his knife and he stabs himself because he knows that if he's hurt, he can go home. You see? That's smarter than what the world can figure out. So you have to find a way to be smarter than the world, or you're not going to survive. My father survived the Cultural Revolution in China. He escaped persecution, but I guess he still carries a lot of pain and anger and violence, which he found in the movie and then projected onto me, just like all the artistic accolades projected from the critics and the awards onto me, and the jokes, the racism, the blood and the death projected from my classmates onto the version of the movie that played in our playground. And I guess I still wonder to what extent these three movies coexist and how they're at war inside of my memories. But the movies live on. Okay, I'm just gonna start speaking now in interest of time. You know, thinking about why I wanted to show this at the end of this program and how it connects to, you know, Mediaburn's mission of media activism, because I don't know if I would, you know, call this an activist film by any chance, but Mediaburn is also an archive, and, you know, is very much concerned with questions of historical preservation and, you know, exploring the legacy of cinema and media. So yeah, I would definitely call this an archival work. Like it's archiving this former site of a cinema. It's archiving an experience of cinema and what that, you know, what the implications of that are along cultural and political dimensions, which may point to the possibility of an activist awareness. And again, like it's a way to think about what this activist word means to me. I think one reason why I've been resistant to the activist label for so long is because it's more, to me, it implies more of a closed fist than an open hand, if that makes any sense. You know, there's a very prominent Asian American curator and critic who watched this and was a bit ambivalent, because she's like, well, this is not empowering. This is like licking the wounds, licking old wounds. And Asian American media needs to do more than just sort of like this is reactionary. This is like kind of reperforming the trauma of the past. And we need to kind of take a more assertive stance, and we need to, you know, be more empowering and empowered. And this is not quite doing that. So I still, I'm still debating that myself, but I kind of offer that to us as an audience to kind of think through that way of constructing the question at stake. So maybe that could be a nice way to open up to to a more general conversation, because I know you've been very patient and we've gone a little bit over the expected time, but thank you very much for your attention.
I think we have a little bit of time for questions if anybody wants to ask any questions. And here, I'm gonna give myself gallery view. If you wanna, you can raise your hands.
Looks like Irene Sosa has a question.
Oh, yeah. So thank you very, very much. I like admiring you, and I'm hoping to be on Saturday in the Museum of Modern Events. But one thing with, I've been studying you a lot for this event, but one thing that I found at this video, this last video that you show, feels to me more, I'm going to go and do this without all the planning, which is something that I would like to ask you, how you organize all this material. But something that it feels very reactive. Yes, you have memories, and I can tell you a little bit of story of this, but it seems like a very emotional, I want to get this out of my chest video. So I would like if you can compare that with the other ones that are always so organized and you have all this amazing footage, something about just doing something from your heart without planning that much. You can say something about it. Because I admire the organization of your work is amazing to me. So it's just think that you have something you have to say and you went and did it. So if you can.
Yeah, it's very kind. Very kind commentary. Thank you. But yeah, not to disappoint you, but this wasn't, well, it's not a purely like improvisational work. On the one hand, it's a memory that I've just sort of been carrying for a long time. And then during the circumstances of being in lockdown in my mother's house for 3 months and just kind of being revisited with these memories and just being within proximity of that site, I just, felt like I should go there. And what I did was I sat in my car in the parking lot facing that liquor store for like the better part of 2 hours, just like rehearsing the story in my mind, like speaking it over and over. It's funny because like it showed at the Hamburg Short Film Festival, and they asked for the transcript so that they could create German subtitles. And I went through my laptop and my phone and I couldn't find a transcript because there was no transcript. I had just like basically rehearsed the whole thing over and over in my head for 2 hours, and then started filming. And then I went 2 more times to refilm the sites until I had it in a way that just felt right for me. So so there is definitely a dimension. It's not so spontaneous and not so improvised. There's definitely a lot of reflection and rehearsal, and I would even say refraction, to borrow Allison's term, that it is about kind of, it's very much a refractive experience, kind of taking this one experience and exploring the different directions and different ways of looking at it from my perspective, my father's perspective, my classmates' perspective. So that, and even though it is like intensely personal, there is a multiplicity in there that I find I'm very drawn to. It's like, how can I speak not on behalf of myself, but also summon multiple voices to speak inside of this experience. I think that's very, very crucial. I don't know if there are any other comments, but thank you for the comments in the chat. Appreciate it.
I'm monitoring chat, and
I'll just seeing Michael Renov's name check of Adorno while I was watching this made me think like there's actually a little bit of Adorno in my father. Like he's a bit of a heretic and a bit of a system breaker. So maybe that's where this comes from. Like trying to that, and that the essay in some ways is a way of outsmarting the normativity of cinema practices in the world. You know, I don't necessarily endorse my father's views on the world, but or where that desire to outsmart the world comes from. But you know, it's definitely something to think about.
It looked like maybe Lisa, did you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that all of your work, but that incredibly powerful piece. I'm new to your work, and I sort of had two questions. One is about conservation of your work, how you consider your work as an art form, and if how you might be considering conserving it for, you know, future cultural archives. And the other is about, I mean, it strikes me the power of that work, you know, should be reaching, or probably has reached. I'm sorry, I don't know about it, but it needs to reach such a big global audience. Do you think YouTube is still a platform for that kind of reach?
Wow, that's a question. Yeah, I try not to think of those terms anymore. It's more like, well, now I kind of pursue it through multiple channels, like online and offline. And I think it's important, like, as for the, you know, the mythos that YouTube is like this ubiquitous channel. I think that really needs to be resisted. And I think we should not pursue YouTube at the expense of all the other channels that exist as an alternative, as a supplement to YouTube, and that we should actually be nurturing these alternative channels, both online and offline, so that we aren't so dependent on YouTube, and that YouTube isn't so dominant in our mindset of where worthwhile video content can be found. I do have a Vimeo channel. I can put that in the chat. And talking about preservation, yes, I went through this in 2016 when Fandor, in their wisdom, decided to like remove all liability, because their hold on copyright materials had changed, and so they decided it was better to just like wipe the slate clean and rid themselves of any liability from any like previous videos that had been produced for them. So all of my videos were taken off. And this was like during my Harun Faroki residency. So I spent this precious time of my residency just re-uploading every video onto my own Vimeo channel. So I basically performed the role of an archivist during that time. And I had to ask myself, what is this even worth it? Because, you know, what is the lasting value of these videos when there's so much other stuff to watch? And to be honest, like, a lot of the stuff seems a bit dated, and I have a different perspective on it now. Yeah, that leads to a larger question. And, you know, I'm sure Sarah has thoughts on this as well, as, you know, being an archivist. You know, it's just like, what is our relationship to the archive? How is it an enabling thing? How does it enable us to see anew, to produce anew? When does it become kind of a burden and an obstacle to the new? Because I've experienced both. I've been both empowered and restored by what I've done in the past, but also, you know, burdened and encumbered by it. But anyway, it's there, so you can see it for yourself. So I think Michael has a question.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Tom Weinberg and to all of those who made this session possible, because it's been terrific, and I really appreciate that. Allison and Kevin, great, really great. And I'm reminded of the Montaigne notion and the etymology of the very word essay, which is something like placing the subject in apprenticeship and on trial. You know, the idea that an essay is never a finished thing, and your concerns about the ephemerality of this form, or the sense that you might do it differently, or that maybe you didn't have it right. I think that's kind of intrinsic to this mode of work. And I don't think you should at all be self-conscious about that. I think that is the practice. And I think that the last piece that you showed was extremely moving, because I felt like we were privy to that process of placing yourself kind of on trial, and your memories and your family history and, cultural politics and so many other things. And so I want to applaud that and appreciate that. And I guess that whole question of the archive and essayism, yeah, we definitely want to save. We want to be able to use the work and come back to it. But there's something to be said for work that kind of is self-combusting, and I see some of that happening in some of the work. And then my final comment, it would be from a great interview or conversation between Thomas L. Sasser and Harun Farokhi. And it's a point at which Farokhi said something like, "I always want my films to be smarter than me." And I think I find that to be such a useful tool for thinking about the work. And when I teach it, I try to always kind of share that thought. And I feel that coming from your work is that, it's not auteurist in that sense whatsoever. And it's very modest in its own way, exploratory though it may be, but it does set in process a kind of critical activity that is greater than the sum of the parts. And so kudos.
Thank you for saying all that. And especially the what you said about this video having this inclusive quality, that you're sort of along for the ride as I'm figuring this out in space. And this actually makes me think that this might be my response to the hyper performativity trend on YouTube, where, on YouTube, it's all about presenting yourself and showing yourself, talking about things and doing stuff. And so this is my way of doing that performativity, which is very much a dominant trend in essay filmmaking, or video essay filmmaking. And yeah, as far as the I see some comments in the chat about teaching, because what you said about, Michael, about the work being smarter than you. And I think about, how do I teach that? How do I teach students to make stuff that's smarter than them? I found in recent experience, especially during the pandemic, that this wish, as much as I've promoted it myself, I've found it to backfire at times, because it almost becomes oppressive. And I'm thinking, there's a reason why I've been thinking a lot about Simone Biles lately, where you're just like putting this impossible standard on yourself to the point that it's beyond the scale of being a human being. And how do you get back to being a human being? So in some ways, as much as that quote from Farokhi that you mentioned, it has stayed with me over the years, but in some ways it also needs to be pushed back to some extent, because it's like, how do we bring the essay film and the video essay back to a human scale, if that makes sense, so that it's not this sort of like hyper performance, although we love that, like the second video we watched, I talked about, like, thoughts as spectacle. And I was celebrating at that at the time, but then it's like, well, maybe the spectacular itself needs to be resisted, and we need to get back to ground level, to human scale. So to answer Libertad's question, like these days, I used to be very much pushing students to, like, okay, don't copy others, come up with your own language. But during the pandemic, I was like, you know what, take something you like and just copy it. And it's good enough just to do that, because what happens is, almost naturally and organically, things mutate, and your natural voice just sort of diverges from the thing that you are trying to replicate. And I think that's much more organic. And I guess this has become very sensitive to me, given the times that we're in now. It's like how to bring productivity and production into a more human mode. But maybe Allison, you have, because your student
Ariana, hi.
As a teacher.
Yeah, it's a funny question, because I've really learned to be careful about what I show students, because invariably what I show them is going to show up in at least 3 projects. But I taught a video essay class. Actually, for the first time, I've incorporated video essay assignments into classes. But I taught a full-on video essay class, and I contacted Kevin and Chloe because I wanted one of the projects to be a desktop documentary, and it was supposed to be the third project. It became the final project. And I think it really helped bring students, I mean, it was a sort of perfect way of focalizing questions about the experience they were having, learning online, engaging online with other people, everything that they were doing online, and thinking through them, and it somehow bypassed that, you know, their desire, because this is a media arts and culture program, their desire to be, you know, Hollywood filmmakers. And, you know, for people who don't know, the desktop documentary is a form in which you capture your desktop. And the way that Kevin and Chloe model it is you move between potentially being online, on the internet, folders of images, things that you're writing. And so it's a way of thinking about what you're doing online as you're doing it. And for the vast majority of students who were doing the project ended up contemplating, what does this always online lifestyle mean right now during the pandemic? And the pieces were just brilliant. So I found that to be an incredibly interesting form and way of bypassing their preconceptions about what a video essay should look like and how to emulate other people, because there aren't that many examples online currently, other than the ones coming out of Kevin, the ones that Kevin and Chloe are making. Although a few did emulate you guys.
Yeah, but the desktop documentary, wow, it really, yeah, in the last year, teaching it with students, it's just like, I don't even have to tell them what they do. They're just so intuitively locked into this idiom. It's a language that makes sense to them, that, you know, all they do is screen record what they do on their phones, on their laptops, because that's their world. And yeah, and to think about like the smartphone as the new camera stilo, you know, or the new sort of writing implement, and that you're now writing audiovisually and mediatically. I think that's really what we're getting to here. That and you know, what would someone like Montaigne and Adorno have to say about that? Because I'm sure when they were thinking about the essayistic, they weren't thinking in such a audiovisual mediatic register that we're seeing now. And that really is the question of like, how does all this hyper production and you know, we're just making stuff with our phones all the time. How do we do this thoughtfully, and how do we do it essayistically, to the truest potential of what our minds are capable of doing?
And yet the desktop is the sort of digital equivalent of Montaigne in his, you know, his tower with his books and his paper, thinking about his belly button and pulling books out and referencing things. It is, you know, the tower, the personal cloister of the moment. And so it does actually lead to, I think, far more subjectivity and far more of a processual outcome than bringing footage into Premiere and thinking about what you're going to do with it. Like you,
well, yeah. Okay, what I was gonna say, because when you're painting that picture of Montaigne, like, you know, in my mind, I'm flash hashtag white privilege. But you know, you know, thinking about the desktop as a tower, that's the thing. Is like, you know, in some ways the desktop is maybe it's, yeah, I'm with Team Desktop, because it's not a tower. If it's a tower, it's a very porous tower that's very susceptible to being hacked, and it's networked, and, you know, it's not like you're sealed off, it presents an illusion of power, but it's a power that can have the rug pulled from under you, you know, and at least it's when it's most compelling, is when it's open and exposed and vulnerable to a larger network that way. So yeah, so it's an open tower.
Well, I think that might be a good place to end. This has been a really fantastic conversation, and I'm so pleased that all of you joined us, and so honored that Kevin and Allison made time for this, especially on Kevin's vacation. And thank you. So thank you to you both. Thank you, Allison, for the wonderful questions, and both of you for developing such a productive dialogue. Thank you also to Levi Henke and Max Hart, who handled the tech, which went smoothly as always. And yeah, I will add a final thought about archiving, that Silicon Valley corporations are not archives. And so we shouldn't think of Vimeo and YouTube and Fandor as archives. So all of us need to think about our own archival plan. More copies is better, more copies, more places. So thank you all. And we have another event in 2 weeks, which will be posted online soon, with Julie Gustafson from Global Village, a pioneering early video group from New York City. Yeah, thanks again, and hope to see you all soon.